let's establish something right off the bat. Supernatural has a terrible track record when it comes to treating its female characters well. Hey nerds, welcome back. Today I will be talking about one of the more polarizing female characters on Supernatural, the snarky, sneaky, conniving Bela Talbot, and exploring her character, the way the narrative treated her, the way the fandom reacted to her, and explaining why she deserved better. Season 3 of Supernatural happened during the writer's strike of 2007 to 2008, and the show was starting to change up its mythology. It hadn't yet introduced the Angels and Lucifer storyline, but the previous season had seen the end of the Yellow-Eyed Demon and that particular arc, and the series seemed to be in limbo during its third season. In order to shake up the cast and give the boys new antagonists, Season 3 introduced two new female characters, the Demon Ruby, initially played by Katie Cassidy, and thief and curator of supernatural artifacts Bela Talbot, played by Lauren Cohen. Neither character was initially well received, but while Ruby's moral ambiguity and her subsequent development over Season 4 managed to somewhat rescue her from a scrappy heap, Bela Talbot was not so lucky. Now, it must be noted that while the show has always had sexist overtones and indeed could comfortably be called misogynistic, the show's fandom must shoulder its fair share of the blame for this. The Supernatural fandom has a long history of hating and rejecting any female character who got near the boys, whether from jealousy or because it got in the way of their Yao fangirling. A great example of this is angel-turned-human Anna Milton, who was introduced in Season 4 as a potential love interest for Dean, and who was supposed to replace Castiel as the boys' guide to heaven and hell. Anna's appearance and subsequent hookup with Dean was met with such extreme hatred from the fandom that she was hurriedly written out of Season 4 and then brought back the following season solely to be permanently killed off. While the fandom in general is getting better regarding this, and more recent characters such as Charlie Bradbury, Claire Novak, and Sheriff Jody Mills have been met with a much more favourable reaction, Bela Talbot's run on the show came far too early for her to be appreciated, and she remains to today quite a polarising character within the fandom. In her initial run on the show, Bella was seen as nothing more than a thorn in the Winchesters' side, and the fandom openly reviled her and her actress Lauren Cohen, resulting in her being written off the show in a fairly horrifying manner, which we will speak about shortly. That being said, in recent years, there has been a shift regarding fans' feelings towards Bella, and these days, she is viewed in a much more favourable and sympathetic light than she used to be, and is even beloved by parts of the fandom. So, now that we've talked about the fandom's treatment of her, let's have a look at her journey on the show and how she was horribly mistreated by the narrative. As mentioned previously, Bella was introduced as an antagonist, if not an outright villain. Her first appearance on the show has her swiping a cursed rabbit's foot from the boys, and it all goes downhill from there. She is unapologetic, refuses to take any of the Winchester shit, and deliberately does not play into Dean's self-righteousness and moralizing. One thing which is interesting to note about Bela Talbot and the way in which the narrative presented her is that we were clearly supposed to hate her right from the get-go, even before she had really done anything to warrant said hatred. On their very first meeting, Dean, who at this point only knows Bella through Bobby's description of her, informs her that he believes that she is a truly terrible person, and it's made abundantly clear that the audience is supposed to side with Dean, despite barely knowing the character. For the rest of Bella's run on the show, she was essentially just an antagonist for the Winchesters, often popping up when they least expected her, and almost always getting the best of them. Over the course of the season, she continued to annoy and cause trouble for them, including swiping the cult, which in their minds was the most egregious of her crimes. She is definitely not the most likable character, and it would have been fine for the narrative and the fandom to treat her as such, were it not for one detail the show added to her character, which essentially changed her entire arc and characterization, and which should have changed both the fandom's and the narrative's treatment of her. In the penultimate episode of Season 3, Time Is On My Side, it is horrifyingly revealed that Bela Talbot, formerly known as Abby, suffered ongoing sexual abuse from her father, with her mother's knowledge, and that, at the age of 15, she made a deal with a crossroads demon to have her parents killed in order to free herself of the abuse inflicted upon her. Okay, so let's talk about why this particular revelation about Bela Talbot makes the treatment and writing of her character 50 shades of fucked up. There is a certain awareness which must be shown in media when dealing with characters who are victims of abuse, in particular sexual abuse. Many a time shows have come under fire for not giving abuse victims voices, for using sexual assault for shock value, for building character arcs on the backs of sexual assault. It is a murky and delicate area to tread, and Supernatural kind of fails spectacularly by presenting their victim as an outright villain and essentially showing her no sympathy or empathy. Now, I'm certainly not saying that victims of abuse can't grow up to be terrible people or that Bella's abuse excuses her actions. As said previously, there is no denying that Bela Talbot has some spectacularly nasty character traits, and she is not above harming or killing others, especially to save her own skin. The problematic aspects to her character come not from her being a terrible person, but rather from the show outright condemning her without showing her the same empathy which it shows the Winchesters, themselves also victims of abuse, and whose actions are often as deplorable as Bella's. It is not made clear whether the show always planned for Bela to be a victim of such horrifying abuse, or whether it was a last-minute attempt to make the character more sympathetic. Either way, there are big problems here. In the first scenario, it was always the plan to make her a survivor of sexual abuse, which makes her treatment within the narrative absolutely terrible, as it essentially would mean that the show deliberately turned the audience against an abuse victim, deliberately showed her no sympathy, and deliberately had Dean make tasteless comments to her such as "Daddy didn't give you enough love" and "You are so damaged," both of which come across as fairly gross in light of what Bela went through. In the second scenario, Bella's backstory was a last-minute change, a quick attempt to either shock or horrify the audience or make Bela sympathetic in her final hours. Once again, this comes with all sorts of unfortunate implications. Sexual assault used for shock value is never good, as it greatly undermines what real-life abuse victims go through, and it almost never explores the effect of the abuse, and often it does little more than just piss off the audience. The sad fact of the matter is that this small but significant piece of backstory could have done wonders for Bella's characterization, and could have enriched and added to her character as a whole. Once one knows about her devil's deal, it is much easier to analyze her actions, to see where her self-serving attitude comes from, to understand why she has trust issues, and to see why she is so pragmatic. It also makes her line of work much more understandable, as she probably ended up dealing and trading in occult artifacts in order to find one powerful enough to break her deal. There was so much the show could have explored with this revelation, but instead they condemned Bela to hell with barely a second glance, ignoring not only the horrifying backstory which they gave her, but also the potential which came with it. As said before, Supernatural has a terrible track record when it comes to its female characters. Whether they're being fridged to fuel the Winchesters' man pain, vilified for their choices, or simply used as disposable love interests, female characters do not fare well on this show, and Bela Talbot is a shining example of this. A character who could have been a tragic anti-villain with the potential for exploration of childhood trauma and how it affects a person, Bela was instead vilified by the narrative and the fandom, shown zero sympathy, and then killed off before she even got a shot at redemption. It was a truly awful end for a character who deserved so much better. Alright nerds, that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed. What do you think? Did you like Bella's art? Do you think it could have been done better? Please come and tell me in the comments below. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, please share it everywhere, and please hit that subscribe button. Hopefully I'll be back soon with a new video, so until next time my darling nerds, stay well, please stay safe, and I will see you next time. Mwah.